The NBA always seems to have some wild games throughout the course of their seasons, and over the years, we've witnessed some contests that often get lost in our memory because they're just so random. So in today's video, we'll be covering 10 of the weirdest NBA games of all time, games that you likely don't even remember. Number 10, Los Angeles Lakers versus Cleveland Cavaliers in 2014. It was late in the fourth quarter, and one of the Lakers players, Robert Sacre, had fouled out of the contest. Once the referees and coach looked to their bench to sub him out, they realized that there was nobody else to come into the game. The Lakers were missing so many players due to in-game injuries and other disqualifications that Sacre was forced to stay in the game because there really was nobody else. In this situation, the rules are that the team would have received a technical foul for every normal foul that Sacre picked up after that. Fortunately though, I don't think he was actually called for another foul the rest of the game. Number 9, Oklahoma City Thunder versus Houston Rockets in 2014. 2014 must have just been an incredibly weird year for the NBA, as this second game happened to be in the same exact season. The James Harden-led Rockets were beating the Thunder 73-59 at the end of the first half. It was kind of looking like Houston was going to run away with the game and close them out early in the third quarter. However, that script completely changed in the second half. By the time the game ended, Houston ended up losing by a score of 104-92. Looking back at it, the Rockets were only able to manage 19 total points throughout the entire second half of the game. For a group full of NBA players, that kind of feels impossible for them to be missing so many shots in 30 minutes of game action, yet they somehow managed to pull it off. Houston just always seemed to be really inconsistent that year. Number 8, Miami Heat versus Philadelphia 76ers in 2015. Both of these teams were really wanting to tank to try to get a higher draft pick. LeBron James was off the Heat's roster by this point, and each team was in perfect position for a high lottery pick. The Sixers tried to tank by benching Nerlens Noel and promoting Joel Embiid as the coach for the night. The Heat tried to battle that by resting every single starter on their team and playing only the last 5 guys on their 15-man roster. All 5 of those guys played all 48 minutes that game, and the Heat were still able to walk away with the win. I guess Embiid might not be cut out for coaching after all. He probably should stick to his dominance on the court. Number 7, Malice at the Palace. While it might be a little bit obvious that this game made it onto the list, we've still got to talk about it anyways. Back then, after Ron Artest fouled Ben Wallace incredibly hard on his way to the basket, Wallace shoved Artest after regaining his balance. Now, just a few minutes later, it looked like everything might have gotten calmed down, but that's when a fan decided to throw a paper cup onto the court, which hit Artest in the face. He looked around and got hit a second time with a bottle, causing him to sprint up to the stands and start raining down punches on the fan that hit him. Other players joined the madness, and there was a dramatic fight in the stands between the fans and players, with some fans even jumping onto the court to try and get some shots in. Of course, the rest of the game had to be called off from that point forward because there was just no way they were going to finish it. Number 6, Detroit Pistons versus Houston Rockets. While playing at home, the very talented Houston Rockets found themselves down by 9 points heading into halftime against Andre Drummond and the Pistons. For any team in the NBA, 9 points is almost no lead at all, especially when your team is really talented like the Rockets were, so we knew there was plenty of time to march a comeback. However, their head coach J.B. Bickerstaff didn't seem to think so, and he had a different plan in mind. At the start of the second half, he sent in the last guy on their active roster who wasn't playing any minutes and told him to foul Andre Drummond 5 straight times. For some reason, Bickerstaff thought that getting them into the bonus and forcing them to take free throws would have been a better solution than just trying to come back the normal way. The rest of that quarter, Houston just kept on fouling Drummond. And by the end of the game, Andre had made only 13 of his 36 free throw attempts. Funny enough though, Detroit still managed to win the game by 9 points. Number 5, Miami Heat versus Atlanta Hawks in 2007. The Hawks happened to win this game by 6 points in overtime after Shaquille O'Neal fouled out of the contest. However, the Heat filed a formal protest to the NBA claiming that the scorekeeper actually made a mistake and that Shaq didn't really foul out. The league ended up granting them a do-over because of the protest and had them resume the game at 1 minute left with the Hawks up by 3 points. Ironically, by the time the redo happened, Shaq had been traded to Phoenix, so he wasn't even there to play. At the end of regulation in the rematch, neither team was able to score any more points, and the Hawks ended up winning 114 to 111, the same score that they restarted with. I'm thinking none of them must have been subscribed to our channel, otherwise I'm sure they would have been scoring some kind of points in that protested game, right? If you want to avoid being like these dudes, make sure you smash that subscribe button before we dive right back into the video. Number 4, Miami Heat versus Chicago Bulls. Chicago was going through a pretty rough patch at this time. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Phil Jackson were all gone by this point, and the rest of the roster just got completely blown up. This was the game that the Bulls set the record for the lowest points scored in the shot clock era throughout one game. Chicago's players scored just 49 points total, and they lost by 33 to the Heat. Some people even compared the Bulls to a high school team after that game. Talk about disrespect. Number 3, Memphis Grizzlies versus Oklahoma City Thunder. Even without Ja Morant healthy and active for this one, the Grizzlies still took it right at the Thunder. The first half was a massacre already. The Grizzlies found themselves winning by 36 points. Now, you'd think that Oklahoma City might be able to readjust and get back on track, but it only got worse as the game progressed. The Thunder went on to lose this game by an unbelievable 73 points. It's officially the biggest margin of loss in the history of the NBA to this day. Number 2, Boston Celtics versus Los Angeles Clippers. In a game that they should have blown out the Clippers, Boston just completely fell apart. They ended up losing the game, but the weirdest stat of them all was that they made just 4 of their 42 three-point attempts throughout the game. The success rate on three-point shooting for the Celtics that game was at 9.5%. That was it. At that rate, players probably had a better chance of making a half-court shot than they did putting in a regular three-pointer. We should point out that Jason Tatum, one of the better shooters, was not active for that game, but the rest of these dudes had to realize that at some point, the threes just weren't going to be falling for them. Maybe just ease off the gas a little bit or try to go inside, or maybe it was just a little bit of bad luck, who really knows, but it still made for a crazy strange game to watch. Number 1, Golden State Warriors versus Portland Trailblazers. The Warriors entered into this game against Portland with just 6 active players on their roster, and that number was immediately decreased down to 5 because their starting center hurt his knee in the first 5 minutes of the game and was forced out for the rest of the night. Later down the line, Devin George fouled out, requiring the Warriors to invoke that loophole where he could stay in the game, but every foul he'd pick up a technical. Steph Curry scored 42 points in this game to try and keep them alive, while Monte Ellis poured in 34 of his own, and somehow after all of this adversity, the Warriors found a way to win the game. We already knew that the Blazers had horrible luck in the draft, and now we've got to think about the time they allowed 5 players to beat them while they had a pretty healthy roster all around. It's been a pretty rough go for Portland lately. And that does it on this video regarding the top 10 weirdest NBA games of all time. If you like this video, be sure to click on the top 15 most humiliating ankle breakers.